hear me? Yes. Okay, that photo is 18 years old, I should just point out at this point.
You haven't changed it.
Right, see if I can... Okay, so first of all, I should say thank you so much for coming tonight. I know how easy it is after work just to want to go home and curl up on the sofa with a cup of tea. So thank you for not doing that and coming here tonight. My name's Tanya. I've been writing about cricket for over a quarter of a century, which is quite a terrifying thought. But I've only been writing about the kind of connection between cricket and climate for about 8 years, and it took me a really long time to sort of put together my concern for the planet over here and my work over there, but I did get there eventually, and a lot of that was from talking to Russ over there, who was then the head of sustainability at the MCC, so big thanks to him for that. And Russ was also really involved in the Hit for Six report over here, which is kind of seen as the seminal report on cricket and climate, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later on. The other thing I've kind of found from dabbling in the climate sector is that you often find yourself in quite unfamiliar situations. So this is actually the first time I've ever done a PowerPoint presentation. So fingers crossed that it all goes all right.
Fine.
So, okay, I'm also here as a member of the Next Test, as are quite a few of the other lovely volunteers here. What is the Next Test? We're a non-for-profit organisation that's trying to raise awareness of cricket, to raise awareness of the climate crisis amongst cricket fans, and to try and help people find solutions. We, with Gloucestershire, held the Time to Declare talks here a couple of years ago, and you can look those up on our website. We've also got a blog, and we're on LinkedIn and on Twitter, so please do drop by and find us if you'd like to know more. Yeah, so this is what I'm going to talk about in the next 10 minutes or so. Firstly, how the climate crisis has affected cricket and cricket players, and then what we can do about it. So, why is the climate crisis a particular problem for cricket? Well, few sports are as intrinsically linked to both landscape and weather. So it's an outdoor sport, it's a grass-based sport, it takes place over quite a long period of time, up to 5 days for a test match. It's kind of playing conditions can really change quite radically if there's just a tiny change in the humidity. So it's always been quite vulnerable to things like dry spells of weather, which dry out the pitch and can make it dangerous, or very heavy rain, which obviously means the game doesn't take place at all. But when you throw in extreme weather, when you're throwing in drought, when you're throwing in floods, very high temperatures, high winds, then cricket just becomes extremely fragile. The cricket nations themselves, quite a few of them are really climate vulnerable. I'm thinking particularly of Bangladesh, Afghanistan and Pakistan. I think 10 million people were displaced in Pakistan during those terrible floods a couple of years ago. But really cricket hasn't been able to escape it. So even in Australia, there were bushfire smoke, called off games. In South Africa, whole swathes of youth cricket were wiped out during drought. And yet in the Caribbean, lots of stadiums were damaged by the hurricanes. Yeah, so for those of you who don't know, this is Wisden Cricketer's Almanac, which is kind of the cricketing Bible, and it arrives on the doorsteps every April, and it's kind of seen as the voice of the game, I suppose. And they've been running a cricket and climate sort of chapter since 2018. And in the 2023 edition, so they always have a launch dinner, usually held at Lord's. And the guest speaker that year was a guy called Peter Frankopan, who's the Professor of Global History at Oxford University. And he dedicated his whole speech to the effect that climate was having on cricket, with particular reference to the Hit for Six report, which kind of honed in on the sort of devastating effects of heat on players, particularly those who are wearing heavy equipment like batters or wicket keepers, particularly children who are really heat vulnerable, and particularly in those nations where there aren't kind of any climate guidelines. Okay, so what about here in the UK? Well, many of you will probably remember the 40-degree day from 2022. And lots of us kind of huddled away inside, but cricket did actually continue on that day. And I don't know if any of you were at the Cheltenham Festival, but the game did go on. I think it was the first day of the festival, but the ECB let them reduce the playing hours. And afterwards, one of the players described the conditions as being like Abu Dhabi, which I don't think many people ever thought Cheltenham would be described as. But despite that, the main problem we've had here in the UK, well, cricket's had in the UK, is intense rainfall and heavier rainfall. So this is my bit of audience participation. I think it was in the Hit for Six report, it showed how many county championship overs were lost to rain in the decade 2013 to 2023. So if you'd like to raise your hands if you think the answer is A, over 32,000 overs lost. Okay, B, 62,000 overs. C, 92. And D, 132. Well, you are right. It is 132,000, which is quite mind-blowing not in a good way. Those who are kind of at the forefront of this, of the rain particularly, are the ground staff. And I know we've got some of the ground staff here today at the back. So I spoke to Sean. Do you want to give us a wave, Sean? Who's the head groundsman here at Gloucester. I think it was at the end of March or the beginning of April when it just felt it would never stop raining, and it was before the beginning of the cricket season. And what Sean said to me, it kind of really resonated, because he said it's relentless trying to sleep at night when you can hear the rain coming down and you dread what you face in the morning. And I thought that kind of really reflected not only the physical toil, but the mental toil that ground staff face when they're kind of on the front line of this climate change. So there are kind of the problems that clubs like Bristol and also New Road, which is frequently flooded, face, because they haven't got the £1 million drainage systems to some of the test grounds. But the problems are kind of even deeper at grassroots cricket. I know quite a few clubs that played no cricket at all in April this year. I'm just talking to Neil over there from the ECB, and he's saying that there's clubs that are flooded now. And I know from bringing up 3 children in South Manchester, cricket-loving children in South Manchester, kind of how demoralising it is when practice after practice and game after game is called off. And in the end, it's kind of no surprise when people decide they'd rather go and, play football inside or something where you're actually going to be guaranteed a game. And that also has a kind of a knock-on effect on community cohesion, because I think that the cricket club, I mean, not always, but the best-run cricket clubs are a really good place where people can come together and people kind of cross-community and cross-generational. So it's a real hit if those cricket clubs are finding that they're not getting new members anymore. Okay, now for some good news. So there are things that are happening and there are people that are doing them. So Pat Cummins, the Australian captain, he's not just an incredible cricketer, but he's something of a climate hero. So he set up Climate for Cricket 2 or 3 years ago with some other Australian teammates. And the kind of premise is really simple. They're trying to put solar panels on every cricket ground, every cricket club in Australia, which both reduces the carbon and saves the club's money. So although he has got a bit of a kicking from people in Australia, I think it's a win-win really, and they're making amazing progress. And then Maya Boucher is a young female England cricketer, and we've actually found that the female cricketers are more willing to raise their voices. I don't quite know why, but she has joined Eco Athletes in May 2024. And then I should say that the ECB published their sustainability plan last autumn. Yes? November. And they, I think, are still the only cricket board to have national board to have a sustainability plan. And then at county levels, so Gloucestershire are doing loads of good work, as are Surrey, Warwickshire, Lords. So there's loads of clubs that are taking really concentrating their efforts on sustainability. So yeah, this is the Greenest Ground competition, and I've been involved with that through the Cricketer magazine, and I really, really love it. It's an award that rewards local clubs who are trying to both reduce their carbon footprint and make space for nature. So I think it's depressing to think about, but as well as a climate crisis, we've got a huge biodiversity crisis, and I think we kind of underestimate the kind of little green lungs we've got in cricket clubs that are spread all around the country. And if we were able to utilise those clubs and make them really, really friendly places for nature, I think we could make a real difference. Now Corbridge were the winners last year. We haven't announced this year's winners yet. So they did a whole load of stuff. They were hit by Storm Desmond in 2015, and I think that was a catalyst for them to start kind of moving towards a more sustainable club. So I think they got quite a lot of funding from the ECB's County Grants Fund, which is available for everybody to get to apply for things like solar panels and rainwater harvesting systems. And they've also done bits for attracting nature as well. So there's loads of examples of good practice at grassroots levels. So Whalley Range Cricket Club, I know because it's a club near me, but they've done loads of tree planting because they're always getting flooded out by the Manchester rain. So they've done loads of tree planting. They've planted fruit trees which are available for the local community to come and pick. They've got bird boxes, bug hotels, and they've left areas well for nature as well. Valley End Cricket Club's a really interesting one because they actually won a Greenest Ground award as well. And the kind of main guy there, who's called Marcus, he said that was actually really important for the club because it meant that the members then bought into the whole idea of having a more sustainable club. And they've been raising money, and they want to set up an outdoor classroom which can be used both by their youth cricketers and by local primary schools. So I thought that was really interesting. The Yorkshire Cricket Foundation, they've been trying to reuse old kit. I mean, cricket equipment is another topic altogether. You could talk about that for half an hour. But that is, yes, basically saving stuff going into landfill and making cricket more, what's the word? Easier for people on low incomes to get into. Fossil fuel sponsorship. So people are increasingly speaking out about fossil fuel sponsorships because fossil fuel companies are using sport, just like tobacco companies did, 10, 20 years ago, to try and greenwash their image. And unfortunately, cricket is just as filthy as all those other sports out there. To give you a couple of examples, if you put on the Women's World Cup, you'll see Aramco billboards everywhere because the ICC re-signed a deal with one of the world's biggest polluters. And Lords have a deal with JP Morgan Chase, who are one of the biggest investors in new fossil fuel exploration. So cricket fans have found different ways of raising their voices. You might remember a Just Stop Oil protester running onto the pitch at Lords and being manhandled off by Johnny Bairstow. But there have also been a couple of banner drops at Lords, one from, I think it was Extinction Rebellion doctors, and one from a group called, I keep forgetting this, I did write it down. Yeah, Mothers Rise Up, that's right. And they also produced a climate advent calendar, which they gave to Bruce Carnegie-Brown, who was then chair of the NCC. And earlier this year, Mike Greeley, who's probably the most famous England captain ever, he spoke out about how fans should raise their voices against fossil fuel sponsorship of cricket. So I think the most powerful thing that we have in cricket fans is basically how many of us there are. There are billions of us all over the planet, and also how passionate we are about the game. So I think, as it says on the slide, if you can think of every positive action as a run that you're making in cricket, So, you know, a handy 25 or a double century like Ben Charlesworth did earlier last year, or a Harry Brook triple, you know, everything we do, added together, it can make a huge difference. Yeah, so maybe quite surprisingly, I'm going to leave the final word to Shane Warne. He might not strike you immediately as a huge kind of green guy, but he was a member of the MCC World Committee who were given a preview of the Hit for Six report in 2019. And I spoke to him about it afterwards, and I think he was preparing to commentate on an Ashes test. And he was really, really kind of shell-shocked by what he'd heard. It kind of just he hadn't put two and two together before. So I think that kind of shows how important it is that we're kind of brave when we go out there and we talk to people who we might not necessarily think are engaged with the topic. Because sport's got a really amazing power to communicate. I mean, look, it's brought all of us here on a kind of October evening. So I just encourage you to go out there, have conversations, and do what you can. So thank you very much.
Lovely, thank you, Tanya. This is personally pertinent for me as well, because as Neil probably remembers, because we were working at MCC together at the time, it was actually me that presented the Hit for Six report to the World Cricket Committee on that day, and the one time that I had an opportunity to talk to Shane Warne, I wasn't talking to him about cricket, I was talking to him about climate change, which is even more important, arguably. Tanya, thank you. Look, there was so much in there, lots of issues that you raised, the really strong tangible examples of impact on cricket, but then also cricket, both professionally and at recreational level, actually taking some action around some of these issues. And opportunities for education as well. We go through all ages, so there's an opportunity to educate through cricket and talk to young people about these issues, and that's the power of cricket, is what we can actually do. So again, right now you're going to go back into your discussion groups, into your round table groups, and you're going to answer the second set of questions that we have. So again, quick fire, about 15 minutes or so. Remember the post-it notes, write down anything that you didn't actually get down during the conversation. See you back here in 15 minutes.
One of my first presentations on the executive housing I'm so obsessed to say half an hour about climate change. I don't think they knew what was going to happen, but basically, I mean, I put on my first class, I was like, the IPCC